Why did she stand so still, even as the desert heat shimmered and the ramp groaned open? Maybe because stillness was the only thing she'd ever trusted. The C-130's hydraulics whined, dropping its ramp with a mechanical sigh that swallowed the noise of engines and replaced it with the roar of wind and dust. The sun outside was merciless, a living, burning thing, flooding the fuselage in ochre light and grit. A few of the Marines squinted against it, coughing into their sleeves, but the last one in line didn't flinch. Sergeant Eva Rostova. She stood motionless at the edge of the ramp, one hand on her rifle, the other tightening the strap that cut across her chest. Around her, the others jostled and shouted, laughing too loudly like soldiers always do when they first hit the ground, trying to mask nerves with noise. She didn't join in. She watched, measured. The noise, the movement, the bravado, it was all static to her. When her boots finally hit the ground, it was as if she'd stepped into another planet. The air was heavier, sharper, filled with the smell of baked sand, diesel, and something metallic that clung to the back of her throat. The valley ahead, dry, cracked, and endless, framed the tiny forward base at its center like an afterthought of human arrogance. Fob Nightingale. A scattering of tents, sandbags, and wire, fragile and temporary. The young Marines who arrived with her looked around, wide-eyed, but Eva didn't. She'd seen too many places like this. Each one felt the same, like a scar on the earth. As they crossed the tarmac, one of them noticed. "Hey," a voice called from the side, "check it out." Corporal Diaz's loud, tan lines mirrored shades, a smirk that came standard issue. He jabbed an elbow into the ribs of the kid next to him. "New marksman's got barbecue mitts." A few heads turned. The gloves were regulation once Nomex flight gloves, but these weren't green anymore. They were scorched, blackened across the knuckles, the fabric warped and melted in thin lines like they'd been caught in a fire. The fingers were stained, worn down almost to the stitching. They looked less like gear and more like relics. PFC Jensen snickered nervously. "Maybe she's a welder, Sarge." Diaz grinned. "Or maybe she's afraid of getting her hands dirty." The laughter was quick, cheap, forgettable. The kind of laughter that only comes easy when you do know who you're talking about. Eva didn't react. Her eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, didn't even flicker in their direction. She kept walking, the strap of her rifle creaking softly with each step. But in the crowd of sweat, swagger, and sand, her silence was the loudest sound of all. Captain Thorne was waiting for them at the gate. His uniform looked like it had been pressed in the desert sun, creases razor-sharp even in the heat. His expression never changed, not when he spoke, not when he blinked. Some men wore rank like armor. Thorne wore his like iron. He scanned the new arrivals, his eyes like a checklist. Then he saw her. They paused on the gloves. He frowned just slightly, but in the silence of command that frown was enough. "Sergeant," he said, his tone clipped, stripped of warmth, "welcome to Nightingale." It wasn't a greeting, just a reminder that she was expected to respond. "Captain," she said, voice low, even. His gaze dropped to her hands again. "Those gloves are non-regulation." "They're functional, sir." It was a simple reply, but the weight of it hung in the heat like a challenge. Thorne's jaw tightened. Functional is not the same as regulation. He turned slightly, making sure his men were within earshot. "You'll draw a new pair from supply. Today." "Yes, sir." But she didn't move. The standoff was silent, but everyone felt it. Two people locked in a quiet collision neither was willing to acknowledge out loud. Thorne was a man who built his world on control, on rules. And she, standing there with those burned, stubborn gloves, was a threat to that order. He broke the silence first. "Gunny coal," he barked. "Get them processed. I want the new marksman zeroed by 1500. "Yes, sir." Thorne gave one last pointed glance at the gloves before turning away, his boots grinding against the gravel. Diaz coughed into his fist, hiding a smirk. The others chuckled quietly. Her welcome was complete. To them she was just the weird one, the woman with the burned gloves. But to Eva Rostova, it was nothing new. People always needed to laugh at something they didn't understand. And she'd stopped needing to be understood a long time ago. The firing range lay at the edge of the valley, a long scar of flattened earth marked by rusted barrels, sandbags, and paper targets fluttering weakly in the wind. By afternoon, the heat shimmered so violently that the targets looked like ghosts dancing in the distance. The Marines watched as she sat up prone, legs aligned, her M110 rifle settled against her shoulder like an old friend. Gunny Cole stood behind her, silent and steady, an old soldier with too many stories written into the lines of his face. Captain Thorne was there too, his presence heavy, his arms folded behind his back like a judge waiting for a confession. Diaz and the others lingered off to the side, pretending to clean rifles but really watching her. Thorne's voice cut through the wind. "I see you haven't made it to supply yet, Sergeant." Eva didn't look up. Her eye stayed pressed to the scope. "Finishing my primary task first, sir, zeroing the weapon." "You can't zero a weapon properly with damaged equipment," he said sharply. "Those gloves affect your grip, your trigger control." "They won't, sir." Diaz grinned. Maybe she needs them for emotional support. A few stifled laughs. Thorne ignored them, though his jaw flexed. He crouched closer, his shadow falling across her. "Are you sentimentally attached to those charred rags, Sergeant?" he asked. "Or is there a story there we should all be privileged enough to hear?" Eva finally lifted her head. Her eyes met his clear, steady, unsettlingly calm. "They're part of my system, sir. They work." Thorne's mouth tightened. "Your system," he repeated, tasting the words like they offended him. "In my company you follow my system. Now prove it." He pointed toward the 600-meter target, a faded silhouette swaying in the wind. "5 shots, fist-sized grouping. Show us how well your system works." Silence fell. It was a simple order, but it felt like a challenge. She didn't argue, she just turned back to her rifle. Her movements were measured, a slow inhale, a steady exhale, the kind of discipline that doesn't come from training but from living on the edge of consequence. The wind picked up, sweeping dust across the ground. She didn't bother checking the instruments. She watched the air itself, the way the heat warped the horizon, the small tremors of sand caught in the light. Then stillness. The first shot cracked across the valley, echoing against the mountains like thunder. She worked the bolt, fired again. Then again. 5 times in total, 30 seconds. When the last shell casing hit the dirt, she said quietly, "Clear." Gunny Cole stepped forward, raising his spotting scope. He peered through it for a long time, his face unreadable. "Well," Thorne demanded, his impatience brittle. Cole's voice came low. "There's no spread, sir." Thorne frowned, meaning. "All 5 rounds went through the same hole." Silence. Diaz blinked. Jensen swore under his breath. The others looked at one another, unsure if they'd heard right. One ragged hole, dead center. The desert wind filled the space where laughter used to be. Thorne's expression hardened. This wasn't the result he wanted. A clean failure would have been easier to punish. But this was defiance wrapped in perfection. He stepped closer. "This changes nothing," he said. "You got lucky. See the supply NCO, new gloves, that's an order." "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet, unmoved. She began cleaning her rifle, calm, efficient, precise, while Thorne turned on his heel and walked away, his control cracking just slightly with each step. Cole stayed behind for a moment, watching her. There was something in his eyes now, not pity, not confusion, but something like recognition. Diaz glanced at the target one more time. The hole was smaller than a coin. He didn't laugh this time. The heat shimmered around them, the sound of metal clicking under her hands, steady, patient, unbothered. For the first time since she arrived, no one spoke. And under the unforgiving desert sun, the woman they'd mocked for her burned gloves became a quiet question none of them knew how to answer. Why did he hate her silence so much? Maybe because silence was the one language he couldn't control. The sun hadn't even risen when the call came. 400 hours. The base was still half asleep, a landscape of shadows and low murmurs. The tactical operations center buzzed with recycled air and the quiet hum of old machines. Captain Thorne stood at the head of the table, laser pointer in hand, his posture rigid as always. A grainy drone feed flickered across the main screen, the gray, lifeless view of a compound tucked deep in a canyon. Objective codename, Scythe, Thorne announced, his tone crisp. IED specialist, responsible for 17 confirmed coalition deaths in the last 4 months. The room fell still. The only sound was the quiet tap of keys from the comms desk. Thorne zoomed in on the feed. A cluster of heat signatures blinked around a central building. Intel suggests he's hosting a meeting tomorrow at 1400 hours. That gives us one chance, one shot. He pointed at a ridge overlooking the compound. We insert here Viper's Perch, clear line of sight, long range. We move under cover of darkness tonight. He turned, eyes sweeping the room like searchlights. Sergeant Miller, you'll take primary sniper. Miller, broad shoulders, square jaw, too much confidence for one man, grinned slightly. Roger that, sir. Rostova, Thorne continued, not looking at her directly. You'll spot for him, provide secondary overwatch. There it was, the sting disguised as an order. The men shifted in their seats. Everyone knew what that meant. Making a marksman, a spotter, was deliberate humiliation, a reminder of hierarchy. Eva didn't argue, didn't even blink. Yes, sir, she said simply. Her tone was calm, but the air seemed to thicken. Thorne clicked the laser pointer again, projecting wind patterns across the valley. Forecast calls for gusts up to 40 knots by midday. Possible sandstorm approaching from the west. That's our clock. We're in and out before it hits. He clicked off the screen. Questions? No one spoke. Good, he nodded once. Brief your teams. We leave at 2100. As the men filed out, Diaz glanced at Rostova. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by something like curiosity or maybe guilt. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. Outside, dawn broke across the valley in slow, harsh gold. The wind picked up early, dragging sand like smoke over the ridges. Eva stood alone beside the armory, checking her rifle. The weapon gleamed faintly in the first light. She moved methodically, loading, inspecting, cleaning. Each click of the bolt was a heartbeat, each motion quiet, deliberate. The door creaked behind her. Sergeant Gunny Cole stepped out, coffee mug in hand, steam curling into the cold morning air. His expression was unreadable. You always work this early. She didn't look up, sleep overrated. Cole grunted softly, watching her movements. You know he's testing you. I know. He's not used to being shown up, Cole said, sipping his coffee. Men like Thorne don't take it well when something doesn't fit the box. Her hands paused briefly on the bolt carrier. That's not my problem. No, Cole said slowly, but it might become one. She looked at him then, eyes cool, detached but not unkind. Everyone got a system, Gunny. His is control, mine's performance. Cole chuckled quietly, shaking his head. You sound like someone who's been here before. She didn't answer. And he didn't push. Old soldiers knew when not to pry. By the time the convoy rolled out that night, the sky was moonless and black, a lid over the desert. The only light came from the faint red glow inside their helmets and the soft green of night vision. The team moved like shadows through the canyon. Their boots crunched softly against gravel. The occasional whisper of radio static cut through the silence. 12 hours of climbing, no breaks, no lights, just the slow grind of ascent. Dias stumbled more than once, cursing under his breath. Jensen tripped once, earning a quiet watch your footing from Cole. Through it all, Eva moved like water, fluid, precise, never hesitating. Even burdened with gear, she climbed as though gravity applied differently to her. Miller noticed he didn't like it. By dawn, they reached the ridge, Viper's Perch, a jagged edge of rock overlooking the box canyon below. The compound was visible through the haze, a cluster of buildings ringed by walls. They began building their hide, rocks, netting, camouflage sheets, cramped, hot, uncomfortable, but effective. The sun rose and the desert turned cruel again. The heat shimmered off metal, off skin, off everything alive. Eva sat apart, her rifle across her knees, eyes on the horizon. She still wore the burned gloves. Thorne had seen it, said nothing. Maybe because this time he wanted her to fail on her own terms. By 1300 hours, the wind began to change. What had been a steady desert breeze became something wilder, angrier. It ripped at their netting, stung their faces with fine grains of sand. "Wind's picking up early," Cole muttered, squinting through his binoculars. Below, figures began to appear, vehicles rolling into the compound, men carrying rifles, forming circles. There the target. Scythe. Tall, limping slightly, moving with the calm arrogance of a man who believed the storm would never touch him. Thorne's voice came over comms, low but tight. "Targets confirmed. Miller, you have primary. Rostova, confirm range." Eva's voice was even. 600 meters, line of sight clear, crosswind 22 knots, gusting to 30. "Adjust and prepare to engage." Miller was already prone, cheek pressed against the scope of his .338 Lapua. He squinted through the lens, steadying his breathing. Then cursed softly. "I'm losing visibility," he hissed. "Wind's shifting every second." "Compensate," Thorne ordered. "I'm trying," Miller snapped. "Dust is on the lens, it's like looking through a sandstorm." "You are looking through a sandstorm," Cole muttered under his breath. The wind screamed, shaking the hide. Fine dust coated everything, optics, skin, weapons. The horizon blurred to yellow-gray nothingness. Thorne's voice cracked through the static again. "We're losing the window. Rostova status." She was lying beside Miller, watching through her own scope. "Watching," she replied calmly. "Can you see him?" "I can." Miller laughed bitterly. "Yeah, sure. My optics are state-of-the-art and I'm blind. She's got a hand-me-down scope and—" "Quiet," Cole barked. Thorne's tone sharpened. "Can you make the shot, Sergeant?" The question hung in the air. Eva didn't answer right away. Her body was still, perfectly still, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The wind howled like a living thing. "The targets will disperse in under 2 minutes," she said finally. "If we wait, we lose them." Thorne hesitated. His pride fought with his command instincts. Everything in him wanted to say no, to keep control. But command wasn't about control. Not here, not now. "Take the shot," he said, voice tight. "Engage at will." Miller turned toward her, incredulous. "You can't be serious." "Quiet," Cole snapped again. Eva didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and pulled the scorched glove from her left hand. The motion was quiet, but it felt deafening. She tucked it into her vest, then the right. Bare hands. The air around her seemed to still. Even the storm, for a heartbeat, held its breath. Her fingers, pale, scarred, twisted slightly at the knuckles, caught the faintest shimmer of light. The skin was smooth and puckered, almost translucent in places, cross-hatched with the faint lines of old burns and grafts. No one spoke. Dias stared, frozen. Miller's expression shifted from disbelief to something like shame. Those gloves hadn't been an affectation. They were armor. Now she'd taken it off. She rested her raw palms against the rifle, the metal biting into her skin. She exhaled once, a long, steady release, and then placed her eye to the scope. The wind screamed. Her voice came through comms, calm and surgical. Target locked. The shot broke the world open. A single, thunderous crack. Down below, Scythe collapsed mid-step, body folding as if the air itself had been pulled out of him. Before the others could react, Eva worked the bolt, chambered again, fired. A second man fell, then a third. 3 shots, 10 seconds. And the storm swallowed them whole. The wind roared like an animal, turning the world into chaos, sand, sound, darkness. Inside the hide, the team sat frozen. Miller's jaw hung open. Diaz whispered, "Jesus Christ." But Eva just lowered her rifle. Her bare hands trembled once, not from fear, but from the recoil, the sting of metal against healed flesh. Then she reached into her vest and quietly pulled the gloves back on. The gesture was small, but it was final. The storm hit them in full. For 2 hours they were pinned down by the fury of the desert, the sky a living wall of sand. No one spoke, not even Thorn. When it finally passed, leaving the world silent and raw again, the air inside the hide felt heavy. Every man there had seen something he couldn't quite name. Something that wasn't just skill. Something like faith, not in God but in mastery. Cole said it first under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." Eva didn't answer. She just kept her eyes on the horizon, where the storm was fading. And somewhere beneath the settling dust, 3 bodies lay where she'd left them, perfectly placed, impossibly precise. How long does silence last after a storm? Sometimes forever. The desert was unrecognizable. When the sandstorm finally broke, it left behind a world that looked scraped clean, stripped of color, stripped of sound. Every ridge, every rock, every rifle was buried under a thin coat of dust that shimmered like frost under the bruised evening sky. The team emerged slowly from their hide, one by one, faces pale, eyes red-rimmed from the grit. No one spoke, not yet. Sergeant Eva Rostova was the last to rise. She brushed the sand from her rifle, checked the chamber, the barrel, the scope, calm, mechanical, precise. The same hands that had fired through chaos now moved with delicate efficiency. The scorched gloves were back on. Cole watched her quietly from a few feet away. There was something in his expression, not confusion, not awe, something quieter, a veteran's recognition. Diaz was still pale. Jensen's hands shook as he reloaded. Miller sat off to the side, staring at his rifle, his confidence shattered into silence. The wind had died, but its memory still roared in their ears. "Targets confirmed," Gunny Cole said finally, breaking the stillness. His voice was rough, low, 3 down, HVT included. Rostova didn't respond. She didn't need to. The others began to pack up, rolling camo netting, loading gear, their movements sluggish from exhaustion and disbelief. Thorne's voice crackled faintly over comms, strained and distant. "Status report, Viper's Perch." Cole keyed the mic. "Mission successful, confirmed kills, no casualties." There was a pause long enough to feel intentional. Then Thorne's voice again. "Understood, exfil on schedule. Maintain radio silence until contact point." "Copy." The line went dead. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, just orders. Cole looked over at Eva again. She was kneeling now, wiping fine sand from the magazine springs with slow, steady strokes. The wind still caught strands of her dark hair that had come loose from her helmet. Diaz leaned close to Jensen, whispering just above the breeze. She didn't even use the scope readouts, man. Did you see? She just felt the shot." Jensen didn't reply. He just kept his eyes on her, as if afraid to look away. The climb down from the ridge took hours. The sand was soft now, treacherous underfoot, the storm having erased every previous path. The desert at night felt endless, like walking across the skin of the moon. No one filled the silence. Every so often, someone would glance at her, that same question in their eyes. Who is she? But no one asked, not yet. They reached the rendezvous point by dawn, a stretch of flat rock carved by wind into shapes that looked almost deliberate. The extraction bird wasn't there yet. The air still carried the scent of dust and engine oil from the storm. They set up a perimeter, took positions, waited. Cole moved over to where Eva sat, cleaning her rifle. She worked as if the mission were still underway, careful, methodical. The kind of discipline that doesn't switch off when the shooting stops. Cole crouched beside her. He didn't speak for a long moment, just watched. The desert light caught the frayed fabric of her gloves, the tiny stitches, the burned seams, the darkened fingertips. "My first tour was 4," he said finally. His voice was low, steady, a man speaking from memory, not curiosity. "Fallujah. Back then you'd hear stories about a Marine sniper team that got caught in Ramadi. Ghost 7 they called it. Heard of M?" Eva's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second. Cole noticed. "They were pinned in a building for 3 days," he continued, watching her profile. "IEDs outside, insurgents in every alley, air support grounded. Only backup was a little bird, just 2 pilots and a 2-man sniper team riding the benches." She didn't look at him, didn't answer. Cole's eyes drifted toward the horizon the same way old soldiers look at ghosts. Storm hit mid-mission, like this one. Visibility 0. Everyone thought they were dead. But the story goes one of the snipers, a woman, kept firing from that helicopter. 5 shots, 5 kills, all in a sandstorm, saved the entire unit. He looked at her now directly. They said she burned her hands bad in the process. So bad she could barely hold a weapon after, but she didn't stop. They called her Ash. Silence. The desert didn't move. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Eva finished cleaning the rifle, reassembled it, locked the bolt forward, and set it gently across her lap. Then she looked up, met his eyes, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Cole exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "Well," he said softly, "guess legends don't stay buried forever." He rose to his feet, dusted off his knees, and walked back toward the rest of the team. Diaz and Jensen looked up as he passed. "Gunny," Diaz asked, "what's the story?" Cole glanced back once, his face shadowed. "You just saw it," he said simply. "Now show some damn respect." Diaz swallowed hard. Jensen said nothing. From that moment, something shifted. The joke stopped. The side glances disappeared. Every gesture toward her carried quiet deference, not out of fear but reverence. They moved differently around her now. When Diaz handed her water, he did it carefully, like an offering. When Jensen set down his pack beside hers, he did it wordlessly. She didn't ask for it, she didn't need it, but it happened anyway. By the time the extraction chopper thundered in, the air between them was something entirely new, something no rank or order could manufacture. The bird landed in a cloud of dust, rotors beating the air to shreds. They boarded in silence. The hum of the engines drowned everything but thought. Thorne was waiting back at Fob Nightingale. He stood stiffly near the landing pad, hands clasped behind his back, face unreadable as the team disembarked. His uniform, as always, was immaculate. The storm hadn't touched him. Gunny Cole stepped off first, saluted, and reported, "Mission complete. HVT and 2 lieutenants confirmed KIA. No casualties." "Copy that," Thorne said flatly. "Good work." His eyes flicked to Miller, who looked away, then to Diaz, then finally to Rostova. She was unloading her pack, her movements steady despite the exhaustion. Thorne's gaze lingered on the gloves again. This time there was no disdain, no irritation. Only silence. He'd read the mission report, the impossible shot pattern, the drone confirmation, the timestamps. He couldn't argue with the facts, no matter how much they contradicted the order in his world. As the debrief began, Miller recounted his equipment failure in clipped tones, each word scraping against pride. When it was Eva's turn, she gave the report with the detachment of a surgeon describing a procedure. Range, wind speed, impact order. No embellishment, no emotion, just truth. Thorne's jaw flexed once. The words sat heavy between them. He dismissed the team soon after. The barracks that night felt different. The usual laughter, the music, the card games, all gone. Just the low hum of generators, the metallic groan of the air conditioner, and the steady breathing of exhausted Marines. Diaz sat on his bunk for a long time, staring at the floor before finally standing. He filled a canteen, walked to Eva's cot. She was sitting cross-legged, her rifle disassembled on a small cleaning mat, same as always. He cleared his throat, too loud in the quiet room. "Sergeant," he said awkwardly, "that was damn." He trailed off, words failed, there weren't any that fit. He set the canteen down on her footlocker, nodded once and walked away. She glanced at it, then back at her rifle. A tiny, nearly invisible nod followed, acceptance. No forgiveness was needed, none was asked for. Later, after the base had gone still, Captain Thorne found her standing alone on the northern perimeter wall. The desert stretched beyond, infinite, silent, cold. The stars burned low and sharp. He approached quietly, boots crunching softly on the packed earth. She didn't turn. For a while neither spoke. The air was cool now, a far cry from the furnace heat of the day. "I read the Ramadi report," Thorne said finally, voice low. "Ghost 7. Still, she didn't move. "They shouldn't have flown that day," he continued. "Storm warnings were read across the board. Command called it reckless." Her voice was calm when she finally answered. "Protocols don't save you when you're surrounded." Thorne said nothing. Her words landed like truth too sharp to argue with. He'd built his entire career on structure, on safety, on the illusion of control. She had lived her life in the collapse of it. And he realized something then, something simple, almost painful. Her burned gloves weren't rebellion, they were proof. Proof that she had survived something that should have ended her. Proof that perfection didn't come from regulation, it came from the places where everything broke. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold. "The wind forecast for tomorrow is clear," he said finally. "Good hunting, Sergeant." It wasn't praise, it wasn't apology, it was respect, the only kind that mattered between soldiers who'd both seen too much. He turned and walked away. Eva remained, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon, the faintest trace of dawn beginning to form. The wind carried softly through her hair, whispering across her gloves. She didn't need words. Some victories were too quiet for them anyway. What do warriors do when no one's watching? They repair the things the world tried to destroy. The base was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes only after storms, when the air still hums faintly with leftover static, and even the wind seems tired. Most of the squad had already drifted into uneasy sleep. Somewhere beyond the tents, a generator muttered in the distance. The rhythmic buzz of the perimeter lights gave the illusion of peace. Inside the barracks, the darkness was soft and red, one dim headlamp glowing faintly against the wall. Eva Rostova sat cross-legged on her cot, back straight, movements slow and precise. The light cast long shadows over her gear spread out before her, her rifle, disassembled and gleaming from fresh oil. A small roll of black canvas containing heavy-duty waxed thread, curved needles, a thimble worn smooth with time. And beside it, the gloves. Black and frayed, torn at the thumb seam. She picked them up with a tenderness that didn't belong to war. The room around her breathed quietly. Every sound was intimate, the whisper of thread sliding through fabric, the faint scrape of a needle against leather, the steady rhythm of breath. No one else was awake, no one else could see the ritual. Because that's what it was, not habit, not repair, a ritual. Each stitch she made wasn't just about fixing torn cloth. It was about holding something together that refused to stay whole. The gloves had been with her longer than any squad, longer than any posting. They'd outlasted fire, storms, and orders. They were part of her system, part of her story. Her scarred fingers worked deftly, pulling the waxed thread tight, securing the seam. The needle glinted faintly in the red light, tracing small, deliberate arcs. She didn't flinch when it pierced the leather. Her hands had long since forgotten pain, or maybe they just learned to translate it into something useful. Her face was calm, not cold, not blank, calm like someone who had spent years making peace with noise. Outside, a coyote called from the ridge, a distant echo swallowed by the night. The stitches continued, slow, perfect, necessary. When she reached the end of the tier, she knotted the thread twice, cut it clean, and ran her thumb over the seam, checking for weakness. None. Satisfied, she set the glove aside and picked up the other. Her eyes softened. The light caught the fabric on the knuckles, melted, brittle, a map of old violence. She traced it gently with her fingertips. The scars on her hands mirrored the marks on the gloves, pale and raised, crossing paths in strange, almost beautiful patterns. The gloves didn't hide her wounds, they carried them. They were her history, shaped by every burn, every mission, every impossible moment she'd lived through. She threaded the needle again. The quiet snick of it sliding through leather sounded like a heartbeat. She didn't rush. The silence in the barracks deepened, heavy, sacred. Even the air seemed to pause around her. Every Marine in that room slept with ghosts, but only she sat awake, sewing hers back together. Her thoughts drifted as she worked, not memories exactly, more like fragments of sensation. The sound of rotors in a sandstorm. The smell of burning fuel. The scream of metal. A helicopter caught in the crosswinds over Ramadi, the horizon vanishing under a curtain of dust. She felt the heat lick through the cockpit, the explosion that tore the world sideways. The rifle barrel searing against her palms as she held on, held aim, refused to let go. 5 shots. 5 lives saved. And 2 hands burned down to the bone. They called her Ash after that. She never asked for the name. It just followed her like smoke. People built myths to survive what they couldn't understand. She never believed in myths, only systems. That was her way of saying she didn't believe in luck or mercy. Only control, only precision. That's why she still wore the gloves. They weren't protection from the world. They were protection for it. So that her touch, the one that had once held fire, could still hold steel. She finished stitching, smoothed the final seam with her thumb, and exhaled slowly. The gloves lay in front of her now, whole again, if only temporarily. She studied them for a long moment. These weren't keepsakes. They weren't sentimental trophies. They were the fragile skin between her and the ghost she carried. She didn't worship them, she maintained them. Her rifle, her gloves, her hands. Each piece vital, each part fragile, each one a weapon only when whole. She placed the gloves aside, rolled up the canvas kit, tied it with a thin cord, and tucked it neatly into her pack. Then finally, she pulled the gloves back on. Left hand first, then right. The fit was perfect, not comfortable but right, like armor that remembers who it belongs to. She flexed her fingers, tested the seams. The light caught the faint glint of thread on the repaired thumb. Good enough. She switched off the headlamp. The red light vanished and the barracks fell into darkness again. But she didn't lie down. She sat still for a while longer, hands resting on her knees, eyes adjusting to the black. The desert outside was starting to lighten, a thin gray at the horizon. Another day coming, another mission waiting. She watched the first line of dawn spill through the slats of the window. Somewhere outside, she could hear the base beginning to stir, the slow metallic creak of doors, the murmur of engines, the clink of gear. Soon the noise would return, orders, voices, laughter. But for now she had this, one moment of stillness between storms. And in that stillness she found the only peace she trusted: function. Everything that mattered in her world, her weapon, her mind, her body, was operational. And that was enough. Later that morning the squad gathered for equipment checks. The sun climbed high, burning away the cool night air. Cole stood beside the Humvee, clipboard in hand. Rostova, optics calibration complete. Yes, Gunny. Wind sensors. Functional. He nodded, checking boxes. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked briefly toward her gloves. You repair those. She nodded once. He grunted, figures. Diaz overheard, glanced over, and hesitated. For the first time since arriving, his tone carried respect instead of sarcasm. Those things ever gonna give out? Eva looked at him just long enough to make him uncomfortable, then said softly, when they do, so will I. Diaz blinked. Fair enough, Sergeant. Cole smirked faintly, shaking his head. You boys could learn something from that. The others went quiet. It wasn't just about gear anymore. It was about understanding what kept someone like her standing when everything else burned down. By noon, Captain Thorne made his rounds, crisp as ever, clipboard under his arm, inspecting every detail as if the world might finally fall in line if he looked hard enough. When he reached her station, he paused. She was seated on an ammo crate, polishing the rifle scope, her gloves catching the light. For the first time since she arrived, he didn't correct, didn't question, didn't order. He just said, Sergeant. She looked up, Sir. The pause stretched. He cleared his throat. Keep your system operational. It was the closest he'd ever come to approval. And she accepted it the same way she accepted everything, with a quiet nod, and no need for words. He turned and walked away. Behind him, the wind picked up again, stirring the dust, whispering across the base. Eva tightened her gloves once more, eyes scanning the horizon. Another storm would come. They always did. And when it did, she'd be ready. The camera lingers. The desert stretches endless and gold under a rising sun. The faint hum of engines begins in the distance. Voiceover low, measured, reflective. Some scars don't ask for sympathy. They ask for maintenance. Because survival isn't about luck. It's about function. About the parts you keep working when everything else falls apart. The sound fades. The last image, her hands, gloved again, resting on her knees, still waiting. Waiting for noise. Waiting for orders. Waiting for wind. And when the storm returns, she'll meet it the only way she knows how, barehanded if she must. Because some dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What happens when the legend has to lead? When the one who works alone must trust others to hold the line. The next dawn came early, sharp, blinding, indifferent. Fob Nightingale stirred under the first wash of heat. Engines rumbled, dust rose, and voices echoed across the compound. The air smelled of metal and exhaustion. Sergeant Eva Rostova stood beside the mission tent, her gloves tight, her expression unreadable. Captain Thorne's voice came through the open flap. Enter. She stepped inside. The operations table was cluttered with maps, satellite images, and empty coffee cups. Gunny Cole stood near the corner, arms crossed, while Diaz and Jensen lingered outside, pretending not to listen. Thorne didn't look up right away. His eyes scanned a tablet, thumb flicking through lines of intelligence reports. Finally he spoke. 2 nights ago, our UAV picked up movement near Sector 9, abandoned village North Ridge. We believe Scythe's network still operates there. Secondary cell, possible weapons cache. He tapped a finger on the map. Recon only, minimal engagement, confirm activity, mark coordinates, extract. Eva nodded, team. Thorne hesitated. You'll lead, he said. Cole Diaz Jensen, Miller's grounded until further evaluation. It wasn't an apology, but it was something close to acknowledgement. She studied him for a moment, searching for hidden motives, but found only weary pragmatism, the kind that comes when even control must surrender to results. When do we move? She asked. 2300. He looked at her then directly. You have the floor out there, Sergeant. I expect precision. You'll have it. She turned to leave. Rostova, Thorne said quietly. She paused. Your gloves, he added, voice neutral. Keep them operational. For the first time, his tone carried no mockery, only respect. She gave a brief nod, then walked out into the sunlight. The desert by night was another kind of battlefield, one fought not with noise, but with patience. Their convoy crawled across the ridgelines, headlights blacked out, guided only by the eerie green of night vision. The wind was cool, deceptive, carrying the faint smell of distant fires. Cole rode up front beside the driver, his silhouette steady against the horizon. Diaz sat behind Eva, unusually quiet, scanning the darkness with his rifle resting across his knees. Jensen muttered occasional coordinates, his voice muffled by the headset. No one spoke more than necessary. The storm from days earlier had carved the terrain into new shapes, dunes reshaped, trails erased. It felt like moving through someone else's memory. By 100 hours, they reached the outskirts of the village. Broken walls, collapsed roofs, a graveyard of stone and silence. Thermal, Eva whispered. Negative, Diaz replied, checking his scanner. No heat signatures. Nothing. Dead quiet. She frowned, that wasn't right. Storms changed the land, not the patterns of human movement. She motioned for the team to fan out. Cole west side, Diaz Jensen with me, watch for comms chatter. They moved through the ruins, boots whispering against sand, shadows swallowing them whole. The night vision painted the world in green ghosts. Eva's senses sharpened. Every sound mattered, every silence mattered more. A creak faint, deliberate from the north wall. She froze. Contact, she mouthed. Cole's voice came through her earpiece, low and gravelly. Visual. Movement flickered at the edge of the village, figures slipping between walls, dark shapes blending with debris. 6 hostiles minimum, Cole said. Looks like they're moving crates. Diaz swore softly, cache confirmed. Eva crouched low, eyes narrowing. No engagement unless fired upon. We observe, mark, and pull out. Copy. Copy. She lifted her binoculars. The glass caught the faintest glint of metal, not just rifles, but detonators, wires, explosives. IED components, enough to build nightmares. Jensen's breathing quickened over comms. Sergeant, they're loading a truck. Looks like they're. The sentence cut off. A sharp sound, a boot scuff against rock. Too loud. The nearest militant turned. Eyes met in the dark. The shout came in a language none of them needed translated. Gunfire erupted. The first rounds cracked through the silence like whips. Sand sprayed into the air. A bullet clipped the wall inches from Eva's head. Contact northeast, she shouted. Cole's voice snapped back, suppressing. Diaz fired short bursts, controlled, precise. Jensen ducked behind a low wall, hands shaking. Eva leaned out, returned fire, calm, methodical. Her rifle spoke in short, disciplined rhythm. One hostile down, then another. But they were outnumbered, 8, maybe 10, closing fast. Cole, fall back to the truck, she ordered. Negative, you're boxed in. Not yet. She scanned quickly, debris, angles, escape routes. Then she saw it, a collapsed minaret tower leaning precariously against the wall. Its shadow pointed like an arrow toward a narrow path leading out of the village. Daya's smoke now. He pulled the pin through. The canister hissed, releasing a plume of thick gray that swallowed the alley in seconds. Move! They sprinted under cover, gunfire crackling behind them. Jensen stumbled, Eva grabbed his vest, pulled him forward. A bullet tore through the edge of her sleeve, missing flesh by inches. They reached the ridge, lungs burning. Cole's voice cut in, steady and rough. Visual on you, 50 meters west. Copy, we're moving. By the time they reached the truck, the village behind them was a blur of smoke and shouts. The radio crackled with overlapping signals, friendly drones shifting overhead, confirming extraction routes. They piled into the vehicle. Dust exploded under the tires as Cole gunned the engine. No one spoke until the gunfire faded into the distance. Only then did Diaz exhale. Jesus, that was close. Eva checked her rifle, hand steady. Close doesn't count. Cole's eyes flicked toward her in the mirror. You saw it, though, the cache. Confirmed. Coordinates logged. She nodded, marked and transmitted. Cole grinned faintly. That's good work, Sergeant. Diaz slumped against the seat, catching his breath. We almost got nailed for a recon run. That's not supposed to happen. It happens, Eva said quietly. He glanced at her, then down at her gloves. You never flinch, do you? She didn't answer. Cole looked back at Diaz, his tone calm but firm. That's because she's not thinking about herself, kid. She's thinking about the mission. Diaz muttered, yeah, well, easier said than done. Eva's gaze softened, not sympathy, just understanding. You'll get there, she said. No arrogance, just truth. They reached the base before sunrise. The debrief was short, Thorne's questions clipped, his eyes sharp. Report, he said. Eva handed him the data pad. Cache coordinates logged, estimated explosives, several 100 pounds of precursor materials, secondary vehicles, likely cell operating independently. Any casualties? Negative. He looked up, compromised engagement. Yes. Reason. Environmental acoustics, one scuff. Yours? No, sir. His eyes flicked briefly toward Diaz, who shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent. Thorne stared at Eva for a long moment, weighing something unseen. Then he nodded once. You handled it. She nodded. We did, sir. For the first time, he didn't correct her use of we. He just said dismissed. As the squad filed out, Cole lingered for a moment, glancing between the two. There was an understanding there now, forged not from words, but from survival. Thorne looked down at the report again, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, it was mostly to himself. She leads like she shoots, quiet, clean, and impossible to predict. That night the base returned to its rhythm. Laughter in the mess hall, radios humming, the routine illusion of safety. Eva sat outside the perimeter wall, legs crossed, rifle beside her. The desert wind was gentle tonight, not hostile, just present. She pulled off one glove, flexing her scarred hand under the moonlight. The skin caught the silver glow, soft and uneven. She stared at it for a long moment, then said quietly, maybe to herself, maybe to the wind. Everyone burns for something. A pause. Mine just happened to leave proof. Behind her, the laughter of her squad drifted faintly through the air, Diaz's familiar voice, Jensen's hesitant one, Cole's low chuckle. It was strange hearing them like that. She realized she didn't mind the sound anymore. Because for once it wasn't mocking. It was human. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough redemption for one lifetime. Voiceover soft, reflective, steady. There are battles you fight with bullets. And then there are the ones you fight with patience. The first test your aim. The second your restraint. And sometimes the quiet victories are the loudest of all. The camera drifts upward, the desert stretching endless and golden under moonlight. Eva sits motionless against the horizon, a lone figure between earth and stars, her burned gloves resting beside her, repaired, functional, and waiting. Because peace was never the absence of war. It was the mastery of it. What happens when instinct becomes insubordination? When doing what's right means breaking every rule you swore to follow. The wind was back. Hot, restless, whispering across the valley like a warning. Captain Thorne stood in the operations tent, jaw clenched, eyes on the flickering drone feed. The signal was weak, distorted by static and sand. Every few seconds the image glitched, turning the canyon terrain into jagged black and white ghosts. He leaned closer to the screen. That's them. Gunny Cole nodded. Convoy sighted 10 clicks west of Sector 9. Looks like Scythe's successor cell. Heavy weapons, possible foreign support. Thorne's fingers drummed against the table. We have confirmation. Working on it, but it looks like they're prepping to move. If those trucks make it to the border, we lose them. The captain turned to Eva. She stood near the entrance, silent as always, gloved hands clasped behind her back. You've been watching the wind, Thorne said. What's your read? Eva studied the monitor. The flags on the vehicles rippled east, steady, constant. Crosswind at 15 knots, she said. No storm yet, but the pressure's dropping fast. Thorne nodded, thinking. Then, we intercept at Ridge 47. You'll lead the overwatch element. Cole will coordinate ground team Bravo. We strike at dusk. Cole frowned slightly. Sir, that's close quarters for her setup, you sure? Thorne cut him off. She can handle it. Eva met his gaze, not defiant, just steady. Rules of engagement. Standard, visual confirmation, then suppress. No civilian collateral. Understood. He held her stare for one beat too long, as if daring her to disobey him again. But she didn't blink. By dusk, the desert was breathing smoke and heat. The overwatch position was barely a ridge, just enough elevation to see the winding dirt road below. Rocks provided cover, but not comfort. Eva lay prone behind her M110, rifle sighted, scope lens shielded by a torn strip of cloth. Cole's team crouched lower in the canyon, hidden among broken vehicles. The comms crackled softly. Viper 1, this is Bravo. We're in position. Copy, Eva whispered. Her voice was calm, measured like always, but beneath it something churned. A strange familiarity. The air smelled like Ramadi again, sand and tension, and the weight of bad decisions waiting to happen. Through her scope she could see them, a small convoy of technicals, canvas-covered trucks, men moving with the ease of experience. Armed, disciplined, not amateurs. She steadied her breathing, watching the road. Cole's voice came through again, low. Visual on civilians, 3, probably locals, walking the outer trail. Thorne's voice snapped through the channel from command. Civilians are secondary. Confirm HVT presence. Eva frowned. Negative ID so far, too much glare off the trucks. Then hold position, Thorne ordered. Do not engage until confirmation. The seconds stretched. Dust swirled, heat shimmered. Then movement. A man stepped out from the lead truck. Tall, broad, head covered in a keffiyeh. His limp matched the file photo. Cole's voice, that's him. Thorne's reply came instantly. Take the shot. Eva adjusted her scope, heartbeat slowing. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Then something flickered at the edge of her vision. A child. Small, barefoot, running from behind one of the trucks, clutching something metallic, not a weapon but a pan. He darted straight into the line of fire. Hold, Eva snapped. Thorne's voice barked in her ear. Fire, Sergeant, that's an order. She froze. The wind shifted, a sudden sharp gust that made the sand swirl across her lens. Her instinct screamed louder than the radio. Negative, she said coldly. Civilians in the line. That's insubordination. Then relieve me after, she said, but not now. Thorne's voice turned venomous. Rostova. But before he could finish, the lead truck roared to life. Engines flared, men shouted. The convoy was moving. Damn it, Cole growled. They're bolting. Engage, Thorne barked. Eva inhaled once, focused. The shot cracked like thunder. The driver's side window shattered. The truck swerved, crashed into the ditch. Chaos followed, men spilling out, shouting, firing blindly toward the ridge. Cole's team opened up from below, coordinated bursts cutting through the confusion. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks near Eva's position, slicing the air close enough to feel. She reloaded, shifted targets, fired again. 1, 2, 3. Her rhythm returned, mechanical precision, measured fury. Cole's voice came through the static. Bravo advancing, keep them pinned. Copy. She caught movement, 2 hostiles flanking left, trying to circle the canyon wall. Daya's left ridge now. On it. Gunfire erupted. One fell, the other vanished behind a smoke burst. Eva scanned quickly. The child was gone, dragged to cover by an older man safe. She exhaled just once. Then a sound she hadn't heard in years. The high, rising whine of an RPG locking. RPG, she yelled. Cole swore. Where? North Slope, second truck. She pivoted fast, adjusting for elevation, wind cross-cutting. Her scope shook slightly, but her hands were steady. Crack! The man with the launcher dropped before the weapon fired. The rocket tumbled, harmless, into the sand. Cole's voice came through again. Nice work, Ash. She didn't respond, but for a moment she let herself breathe. The fight lasted another 5 minutes. Long enough for adrenaline to start fatting, long enough for the comms to fill with static and orders, and the background sound of Thorne trying to regain control from the safety of his tent. When the last gunfire faded, Cole's voice broke the silence. All clear. Eva rolled onto her back, breathing hard. The sky above was deep orange, fading into indigo. Thorne's voice returned, sharp as ever. Viper 1, report. Eva keyed her mic. HVT neutralized. Civilian interference confirmed. No friendly casualties. You disobeyed a direct order. Correction, she said quietly. I delayed it by 5 seconds. It saved a life. Static filled the silence that followed. Then Thorne's voice, low, measured, dangerous. Return to base. We'll discuss your interpretation of duty. Cole's voice cut in before she could respond. With respect, sir, her interpretation just saved us a damn war crime. Gunny. Cole didn't stop. You can dress her down later. Right now, you should be thanking her. The channel went dead. The convoy ride back was quiet. The desert wind howled outside the vehicle, but inside silence. Diaz kept glancing at her, wanting to speak, but never did. Jensen stared out the window, pale. Cole drove, his expression grim. When they finally rolled through the base gates, the sun had already set. Thorne was waiting. He didn't yell, didn't need to. His silence was sharper than his voice could ever be. He motioned her into the command tent. Cole followed without being asked. Thorne's hands rested on the table, knuckles white. You compromised the chain of command. Eva stood still, unflinching. I prevented civilian casualties. You undermined a direct order. I prevented unnecessary blood. Thorne's eyes burned. This is not about morality, it's about procedure. Cole's voice broke through, steady and firm. She did her job, Captain. Exactly how it should be done, clean, smart, by the book that actually keeps people alive. Thorne turned on him. You're out of line, Gunny. Cole took a step forward. So were you, sir. Silence. The tent felt smaller. The hum of equipment, the rustle of fabric, every sound amplified. Eva finally spoke, calm and deliberate. "Captain," she said, "protocol is built for predictability, but war isn't predictable. It's built to kill what's rigid." Her voice softened, almost gentle. Sometimes survival isn't about following rules. It's about knowing when to stop listening to them. Thorne's jaw worked, muscles twitching. His breath came slow, measured. For a moment, he looked less like a commander, and more like a man trying to understand a truth he'd spent his whole life avoiding. Finally, he said quietly, "Get out." Eva nodded once, "Aye, sir." She turned to leave. Cole followed her out, muttering, "That could have gone worse." "Could have gone better," she said. "Maybe," he replied, "but you did the right thing." She didn't answer. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of fuel and dust. The sky was vast, stars sharp against the black. Eva walked to the edge of the tarmac, stopping where the light ended and the desert began. Her gloves were still warm from the rifle. She flexed her hands, feeling the pull of the stitches she'd sewn days ago. They held. So did she. Voiceover low and steady. Command believes in order. Soldiers believe in survival. But sometimes the difference between the two is only a heartbeat and the weight of a trigger you didn't pull. The camera drifts upward, her silhouette alone against the starlit expanse, motionless, unyielding. The desert wind stirs her hair, the sound blending with distant thunder. Not a storm, not yet. But soon. Always soon. What happens after the defiance? When the bullet doesn't kill you, but the silence tries to. 3 days. That's how long it had been since the canyon. 3 days since the dust settled, since the orders fell quiet, since the base turned its eyes away from her, and then back again, different this time. Respect looks strange when people don't know how to show it. No one laughed anymore. No one questioned her gloves or her scars or the way she worked alone. But silence carried its own weight, heavier than judgment. Eva sat alone in the mess hall, the same steel tray untouched before her. The room hummed with the low chatter of soldiers, the scrape of cutlery, the endless rhythm of routine. Every so often, a voice would drop to a whisper when she passed. A few nodded, a few just looked away. She didn't mind, she never did. But the quiet was starting to feel different now, not isolation but distance. She'd done what she always did, followed instinct, stayed functional, kept her system operational. And somehow, that still put her on the outside. Captain Thorne hadn't spoken to her since the mission. Not directly, not officially. But his orders came through Cole now, indirect, filtered, clinical. She was benched from active Overwatch rotations, pending evaluation. She didn't argue, she just trained harder. If there was one constant in her world, it was work. She rose before dawn, ran the perimeter before the first light touched the sand. She spent hours at the range, alone, every shot echoing back across the valley like an answer only she could hear. Diaz started joining her sometimes, awkwardly at first. He didn't talk much either, just practiced. Missed shots, cursed under his breath, tried again. One morning, after his third jammed magazine, he muttered, "I don't get it. You make it look easy." Eva didn't look up. "It's not." He lowered his rifle. "Then how do you?" She cut him off softly. "I miss too, I just don't stop there." He blinked, then nodded, a small, quiet nod that carried more than words could. That's how lessons worked out here, not through lectures, through presence. By the end of the week his aim had sharpened, his breathing steadied, and sometimes when he hit the center ring he'd glance at her, not for approval, just recognition. She never said it, but she felt it, a shift. The same men who once mocked her were starting to measure themselves against her silence. Inside command, Thorne's office was colder than usual. The air conditioner buzzed, papers lay in neat stacks, his desk immaculate. Cole stood across from him, cap tucked under his arm. "Sir, with all due respect, you're dragging this out." Thorne didn't look up from the report. "This isn't about punishment, it's about order." Cole crossed his arms. "Order doesn't mean anything if it gets good people killed." Thorne's voice sharpened. "She disobeyed a direct command." "She saved civilians," Cole shot back. "And she saved you from explaining a massacre to Central Command." Thorne's hand paused mid-signature. He didn't respond. Cole stepped closer. "You think you're keeping control, sir, but you're just proving her right. You keep preaching procedure while she's out there earning loyalty the one way you never could, by bleeding for it." Thorne's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the window, the training field beyond it. Through the glass he could see her, moving through target drills in perfect rhythm. Alone, deliberate, unstoppable. The same burned gloves glinting faintly with each reload. He said nothing for a long time. Finally his voice came quiet. "You think she's right, Gunny?" Cole's reply was low but firm. "No, sir, I know she is." Thorne didn't argue. He just looked back out the window, and for the first time, the certainty in his posture cracked. That night the wind rose again. It always came back, like a memory that refused to settle. Eva stood by the observation tower, her silhouette outlined against the floodlights below. The desert stretched wide and indifferent, glowing under a half-moon. Cole joined her, carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. He handed one over. She nodded in quiet thanks. They stood there for a while, saying nothing. Finally he broke the silence. "You know, Command, talking about rotation." "Rotation." "Possible reassignment. Different base, different command structure." "Punishment or promotion?" Cole smirked faintly. "Hard to tell the difference these days." She took a sip, eyes on the horizon. "Doesn't matter." "It might," he said softly. "You've made waves. People notice when someone refuses to drown." She didn't reply. Cole leaned on the railing. "You know what your biggest problem is, Rostova?" She glanced at him. "You don't let people see you bleed." She tilted her head slightly. "And that's a problem." He shrugged. "Only if you expect anyone to understand you." A small smile ghosted at the corner of her mouth, the closest thing to laughter he'd ever seen from her. "I don't expect anything," she said. Cole looked out at the sand, shaking his head. "That's what worries me." Later in the barracks, the squad gathered in rare quiet. Jensen strummed a guitar softly, off-key but honest. Diaz cleaned his rifle. Miller, finally cleared for duty, told some half-serious story about a storm in Kandahar. Eva sat at the edge of the group, her gloves resting beside her, fingers bare for once. Her scars caught the low-light, pale ridges that glimmered faintly, like old rivers dried to silence. Diaz noticed. "Never asked," he said quietly. "Those burns, they from the crash?" She didn't answer immediately. The room fell quiet. Even the guitar strings faded to stillness. Finally she said, "Not all scars come from one place." It wasn't evasion. It was truth, the kind that ends conversations because it gives them nowhere else to go. But her tone softened, just enough to keep the air from freezing. "Some are reminders," she added. "Some are warnings, some are maps of where not to go again." Diaz nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "Still think they make you look tough." Her mouth twitched, a ghost of amusement. "Tough isn't the goal." "What is?" She looked at her gloves, lying quietly between them. "Useful." The word landed heavier than it sounded. Because that was the truth of her, the thing no one ever understood. She wasn't chasing glory, or pride, or recognition. Just function. And in a world built on noise, that kind of purpose was the rarest form of peace. 2 days later, command orders arrived. Transfer confirmed. She was to be reassigned to a classified forward observation unit, Arctic sector. Minimal personnel, high risk. It read like a punishment wrapped in praise. Cole found her in the hangar, tightening the strap on her pack. "You could fight this," he said. She shook her head. "No need. You're being sent into the middle of nowhere." "I've been there before," she said quietly. Cole sighed, running a hand over his face. "You know what's funny? They don't realize they're not sending you away. They're sending a ghost into the wind." She paused, then met his eyes. "Maybe that's where ghosts belong." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, a soldier's farewell, quiet, respectful, final. As she walked toward the transport, Diaz called out from across the tarmac. "Hey, Sergeant." She turned slightly. He raised a gloved hand, hers, once ridiculed, now mirrored by half the squad. The same wax thread stitched across the seam. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she lifted her own hand in return, gloved and steady. The engines roared to life. The dust rose again. And just like that, she was gone. Voiceover, soft, reflective, breaking through the hum of the departing transport. Respect doesn't always sound like applause. Sometimes it's the quiet that follows after the laughter stops. You don't win that kind of silence. You earn it, one scar, one choice, one disobedient heartbeat at a time. The camera pans upward, the aircraft shrinking into the horizon, swallowed by golden light. Her gloves rest in her lap, stitched, scarred, eternal. Not symbols, not armor, just truth. Because in her world, survival isn't about being remembered. It's about being ready when no one else is. What does silence sound like when it finally belongs to you? The world was white. Not empty, just endless. A storm had swallowed the Arctic horizon. Snow swept sideways in sheets, blurring sky and ground into one. The wind howled like a living thing, clawing at the steel outpost half buried in ice. Sergeant Eva Rostova stood on the watchtower, wrapped in layers of winter armor, her breath fogging the inside of her mask. Her gloves, the same blackened pair she'd stitched by red light weeks ago, now dusted with frost. Below her, the radar station blinked faintly through the storm, a pulse of green in a sea of white. There were no squads here, no chatter, no chain of command breathing down her neck. Just her. And the wind. The Arctic post was a forgotten dot on the world map, a listening station more myth than base. 2 soldiers rotated shifts, 1 technician, and Eva. She'd been there for 26 days. Routine kept her sane. Wake before dawn, though dawn meant nothing here. Run diagnostics, check perimeter sensors, patrol the frozen ridge. At night, she cleaned her rifle, stitched her gloves again when the seams tore from cold, and drank black coffee that tasted like metal. She didn't need noise anymore. Out here, silence was a companion, not an enemy. On the 27th day, the radio crackled. "Station Echo 9, this is command. We're tracking an unidentified heat source approaching your sector. Possible drone malfunction or unregistered movement. Confirm visual." Eva adjusted her headset. "Copy command, scanning grid now." She stepped out into the storm. Snow whipped against her goggles, slicing visibility to 30 meters. She moved slow, deliberate. Each crunch of her boots sounded like thunder against the frozen quiet. Through the static and snow, she caught a flicker of movement, small, mechanical, erratic. A downed drone. She approached carefully, crouched, brushed frost off the metal hull. U.S. make reconnaissance type, but the serial was wrong. Foreign copy, Russian design. Her pulse quickened. "Command, this isn't ours," she said. "Static." No reply. The wind screamed louder. The storm swallowed the signal whole. She exhaled slow, her breath turned to ice. And then she saw them, faint shapes moving on the ridge. Not machines, men. 3 of them, maybe 4. Camouflage white, no insignia. They moved low and practiced. Not lost, not explorers. Professionals. Her heart slowed, not panic, just instinct. She ducked behind the wreckage, unslung her rifle, sighted through the scope. They were closing in on the outpost. No one else was outside. The technician would still be in the control room. If those men reached the station before she stopped them, the whole comm grid could be compromised. "Command," she whispered again. "Hostiles in visual, possible infiltration." Static answered. She was on her own. The first one came over the ridge. She exhaled once. The shot cracked through the wind. The man dropped. The others scattered, no shouting, no panic, just cold, efficient movement. Trained. She shifted position, fired again, missed, adjusted. Her fingers burned under the cold. Her gloves stiffened, the leather frozen at the seams. The wind tore across the ridge, dragging snow and sound away. Two hostiles broke left, circling toward the comms tower. She crawled to the next mound of ice, boots digging into frost. Her gloves tore along the thumb seam, the same spot she'd stitched so carefully weeks ago. She didn't stop. Didn't feel it. The third man appeared over the crest. She fired twice. He fell hard. The fourth rushed from her flank, closer now, too close. She swung her rifle, but the cold jammed the bolt. He tackled her into the snow. The world spun white-gray, soundless. She hit hard, rolled, grabbed for her sidearm. He swung a blade, glint of steel against the storm. She caught his wrist, twisted, the motion tearing her glove open completely. The knife fell. Her bare hand pressed against his throat, skin to skin, raw against the cold. His breath froze mid-gasp. Silence. When she finally stood, snow clung to her eyelashes, her hand red against the white. The storm howled on, indifferent. She flexed her fingers once, the skin cracked, blood freezing in seconds. Her glove lay torn beside the body. She picked it up, slipped it back on anyway, tightened it with her teeth, and kept walking. By the time she returned to the tower, the storm had begun to ease. The radar blinked steadily again. The technician stared at her through the glass, eyes wide, disbelief and gratitude tangled together. "Are they?" She just nodded once. "They won't try again." He swallowed hard, then looked at her hands. "You're bleeding." She flexed her fingers. "Just maintenance." He didn't know what to say. And she didn't need him to. She just sat down by the heater, peeled her gloves off slowly. The burns from before had blended with new frostbite, old scars layered over new damage, history repeating itself in quieter ways. She pulled a needle from her kit, threaded waxed line through it, and began to stitch the torn leather again. The same rhythm, the same ritual. Wind outside, thread inside. Each stitch a heartbeat. Each seam a memory. The technician finally spoke. "Why do you keep fixing those?" She didn't look up. "Because they still work." He frowned, "Even when they're falling apart." She tied the final knot, bit the thread clean. "Especially then." Days passed, the storm lifted, reinforcements arrived. Command confirmed the breach attempt, classified it under routine border interference. But nothing about it was routine. A quiet commendation came through the encrypted line. Her name wasn't mentioned, just a phrase in official language. Field operative prevented communication breach. Status, functional. She smiled faintly when she read it. Functional. That was all she ever wanted to be. At dusk, she climbed the ridge one last time. The snow had hardened under the wind, glittering in the fading light. She looked out at the horizon, a frozen sea stretching into forever. Her hands rested on her knees, gloves patched, rough, unyielding. The scars beneath them ached in the cold, but she didn't hide them anymore. The wind tugged at her jacket, howling like an old friend. She closed her eyes, let the sound fill her. For once, she wasn't waiting for orders. There were no ranks here, no eyes to watch her. Just the rhythm of her own breath, steady, human, free. The camera slowly pulls back, her figure small against the endless white. Voiceover, soft and cinematic, carries through the storm. They laughed once. At the gloves. At the burns. At the silence of a woman who didn't need to prove anything. But she wasn't built to be understood. She was built to endure. And when the world burned, she was the one who kept her hands steady. The wind howls one last time, not cruel but cleansing. Her voice returns faint, almost a whisper. You don't have to speak to be heard. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The camera fades to white snow swirling into the light, then slowly to black. Silence. Not the kind that hides something. The kind that ends it.